Good morning, students. First, I am La Kunakon Abdul, and now let us continue to discuss the lesson 14, which is the comprehension. We have here the overview. In this lesson, we will look at the role of reading comprehension in promoting peace and understanding during the learning process. We will talk about how reading comprehension can help students develop empathy, understand diverse points of view, and peacefully resolve conflict. We will also look at ways for developing peaceful comprehension questions that encourage learners to be conscious and understand. We also have here the learning outcomes. At the end of the lesson, the students can A. Define reading comprehension. Letter B. Identify strategies to improve reading comprehension. And letter C. Create questions for each domain of Bloom's taxonomy using the idea of peace as a guide. And now, here's the continuation of the topic. First, the goal of reading. Reading comprehension is understanding what is being read. Without comprehension, reading is simply looking at symbols on a page with your eyes and making sounds the symbols represent. Yes, basically, reading alone without comprehension, therefore, there will be no understanding at all. Kasi, binabasa lamang yung kung ano yung nakasulat without internalizing it. And nagiging resulta, hindi naiintindihan kung ano yung binabasa. Reading comprehension is important because without comprehension, the act of reading does not provide the reader with any information. Yes, that is why comprehension in reading is vital. Kasi when we read a certain text or a certain sentence, then by using comprehension, it helps us to understand what we read. When a pupil reads for comprehension, he engages in several complex cognitive processes. The pupil is using his phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and reading strategies to construct meaning from the text. Yes, when a pupil reads for comprehension, it helps the students to broaden their knowledge, their cognitive processes. Kapag yung bata ay binabasa niya ang isang context with proper using the comprehension or proper internalizing what he or she have read, so mas nagiging lumalawak yung understanding ng cognitive ng bata kasi nga nalalaman niya kung ano yung ibig sabihin ng kanyang binabasa. Let us proceed to the reading comprehension is an intentional, active, interactive process that occurs before, during, and after a pupil reads a text. First bullet, in order to comprehend, the reader must be able to make connections between letters and the sounds they represent. Blend those sounds into words or recognize the words by sight. Fluently read words, phrases, and sentences and understand the vocabulary used in the text. According dito, in order to comprehend, the reader must be able to make connections between letters. So like for example, the word old. So dito, in order for the learners to comprehend or to know kung ano yung kanyang binabasa, dapat alamin niya yung individual sound of each letter. Like for example, like sinabi ko, yung word na old. It consists of 3 letters. The O, L, and D. So dito, kailangan aware yung students or yung learners, pupils, sa sounds ng bawat word or letter. And from that, mas madaling basahin para sa learner na yon kung ano yung word na yon with the proper using of each sound. And dito, i-blend nung bata na yon yung bawat sounds na nandoon sa word na yon. So, ang magiging tunog nung word na yon is old. And from that, nagkakaroon ng step-by-step process sa pag-comprehend ng bata. And nalalaman na rin niya na ang ibig sabihin ng word na old is matanda or luma. Next, if the individual words do not make sense to the reader, then the overall text will not make sense. So, ano yung ibig sabihin nito? So, kapag daw the individual words do not make sense to the reader, then the overall text will not make sense. So, like for example, I have here the sentence, Johnny is handsome than Albert. So when the individual words within this certain sentence ay hindi alam nung reader, nung learners, kung ano yung ibig sabihin ng mga individual words na yon, basically, hindi magiging sense or hindi niya malalaman yung overall text within that certain sentence. So in order to comprehend for that learner, they should become aware of the individual meaning of the words within that certain sentence. Like example, Johnny, it is a noun. It talks about the name of person. Then handsome, in Filipino, guapo. So Johnny is handsome than Albert. So, ang ibig sabihin, si Johnny ay mas guwapo kaysa kay Albert. So from that way, mas nagiging nakukomprehend ng bata kung ano yung ibig sabihin nung nasa context na yan. So in line with this, to make it simple, para mas madaling maintindihan ng bata, dapat alam niya yung ibig sabihin ng mga words within a certain sentence or a context. Next bullet, pupils can draw on their prior knowledge of vocabulary, but they also need to continually learn new words. So what does it mean? Ibig sabihin, when the pupils or the learners have encountered, or when the learners or pupils encounter the new words within a certain sentence, so lumalabas yung kanilang prior knowledge, they can also use that in order to know the meaning of that certain sentence or a certain text. But they also need to continually learn new words in order for them to continually develop their vocabulary. Next, the best way or the best vocabulary instruction happens when the pupil needs to understand the word in context. Yes, syempre dapat kung meron silang na-encounter na word sa isang sentence, they have to know the meaning, the translation of that word in Filipino. Kasi yun, isa rin yun sa way to develop the vocabulary of the learners. Next, teachers should pre-teach new words that a pupil will encounter in a text and aid the pupils in understanding unfamiliar words as they come up in the text. Yes, we as a teachers, it is vital for us to apply pre-teach towards the learners. Like for example, nag-introduce tayo ng sentence sa mga learners, then merong naka-indicate na unfamiliar words or something words that is difficult to understand. So it is vital for us to teach first what's the definition of that words, ano yung translation niya sa Filipino, and from that, mas madaling naiintindihan ng mga learners. Yes, yan yung sinasabing pre-teach. New words. Next, in addition to being able to understand each individual word in a text, the pupil also has to be able to put them together in phrases and sentences to develop an overall conception of what the author is trying to say. Yes, it is one of the way para mas ma-understand ng mga bata ano yung ibig sabihin within that certain text or context is to apply the words. Yes, one of the strategy is to apply words in a sentence. Kasi from that, mas madali niyang naiintindihan ng mga bata kung ano yung words na yon kapag in-apply siya sa isang sentence. Next, reading comprehension is incredibly complex. Therefore, readers do not develop the ability to comprehend text quickly, easily, or without explicit instruction. Yes, reading comprehension doesn't happen in just one day. Meaning to say, it takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of strategies para sa mga bata to develop their vocabulary. So we as a teacher, we should not be stagnant sa mga pagtuturo sa mga bata. We have to apply different strategies para matulungan yung mga learners to develop their comprehension, reading skills, and even their vocabularies. So we also have here the Bloom's taxonomy and comprehension brainstorming. Since it is a video presentation, so basically there's no such interaction with my fellow students, so I'll answer by myself. So out of the following, which is more difficult and why? First, watching a video or making a video. For me, it is making a video. It is more difficult than watching a video. Kasi, syempre, it has various process. Magsusulat ka kung yung i-film mo, and after that, yun, actual, i-video mo na, i-edit mo pa, and yun. Number 2, repeating a story or writing a story. So for me is writing a story than repeating a story. Kasi repeating a story, mas madali lang siya. And writing a story is quite difficult. Number 3, describing an event or comparing two events. For me is comparing two events than describing an event. Number 4, explaining a concept or evaluating a concept. For me is evaluating a concept because when we say evaluating a concept, it has a process sa pag-evaluate. And explaining a concept is simply explaining what really happened in that certain event or concept. Let us now proceed to the critical thinking skills. Critical thinking skills are ways of thinking about topics or content in new and insightful ways. Entrepreneurs, researchers, engineers, doctors, and inventors must all think critically about the problem they are working to solve. Much like reading comprehension, critical thinking skills develop over time and with explicit instruction. Yes, in every aspect, critical thinking skills is a must. Kasi when we say critical thinking skills, it undergo logic, thinking deeply, and such. Entrepreneurs, researchers, engineers, doctors, and inventors, and marami pang iba, they have here what we call critical thinking skills in solving a problems or doing anything. Kasi nga, critical thinking skills is very important. Much like reading comprehension as well. Reading comprehension, kinakailangan din ng critical thinking skills. Kasi it helps us to develop our thinking skills, yes. And it helps us to deeply understand what we read. And now I have here the Bloom's taxonomy of the cognitive domain. So as we can see, we have 6 stages or category, starting from remember, understand, apply, analyze, evaluate, and create. Mula sa baba papuntang itaas. So, I'll be discussing this mamaya. Knowledge can be divided into several cognitive domains. Yes. The Bloom taxonomy classifies the behaviors associated with what learners can do with new information, from the simplest to the most complex, describing what is expected from pupils at the conclusions of a lesson series. According to Slavin, 2009, Bloom's taxonomy has 6 carefully defined categories that apply to all subject matter, according to Cratwell, 2002. These categories are often seen in a pyramid arrangement, assuming that the pupil must have acquired the skills of the lower domain in order to be able to function at the higher domain. Yes, as what I have said a while ago, na itong Bloom's taxonomy nagsisimula sa pinakasimple or sa pinakababa hanggang sa pinakataas. Meaning to say, nagsisimula sa pinakasimple papunta sa pinaka-difficult or the complex one. Skills on the higher levels of the pyramid become more complex, difficult, abstract, and require critical thinking skills. Yes, yung sa pinakababa, simple pa lang yun siya, and habang tumatagal, nagiging difficult siya, nagiging complex, abstract, and such. Complicated tasks related to utilizing and evaluating information fall into the upper cognitive categories. Yes. Next, often at the higher levels, learners produce a tangible product that represents their learning, or they could provide argument for or against the information presented. So dito nagkakaroon na ng tangible product. Kasi nga it talks about creation or yes, yung kumbaga they can do it. Meron na silang enough knowledge to do something. Mas nagiging na-develop na yung thinking skills nung bata. And now we will discuss the Bloom's taxonomy of the cognitive domain. Yes, as what I have said a while ago. And this Bloom's taxonomy of the cognitive domain, it helps the teachers to track the learning progress of the learner or the cognitive domain of the learners. Starting from remembering, understand, apply, analyze, evaluate, and create. So ito yung categories, which is the step-by-step process from the simplest to the complex one. So we will discuss first the number 1, remember or remembering. So number 1, or the first category on the Bloom's taxonomy, number 1, remember. Here the pupil is able to recall, restate, and remember learned information. This is the lowest level of the cognitive domain. This is simple recall of what has been learned and is often the who, what, when, and where task we assign. So yes, itong remembering, ito yung pinaka simple or pinaka lowest level doon sa cognitive domain, doon sa Bloom's taxonomy. And itong remembering, it is simply recalling, restate, or remembering learned information. Ibig sabihin, yung mga learners is they just simply remember what they have learned. From the word itself, remembering. Next, understand or understanding. It is the second lowest to the Bloom's taxonomy of the cognitive domain. So here, the pupil grasped the meaning of information by interpreting and translating what has been learned. The pupil can put the information in his or her own words. So dito, from remembering, the next is understanding. Ibig sabihin, na-understand from the word itself, understanding or understand, the student or the pupils, learners, is just simply understand. Na-understand na nila kung ano yung binabasa nila. They can now internalize it. Kung ano yung ibig sabihin nito, and such. Next, apply. The pupil makes use of information in a new situation, different from the one in which it was learned. From the word itself, applying, meaning they can now able to apply what they have learned. Like for example, the pupils already know how to read. Then they can now apply it according to the Bloom's taxonomy of the cognitive domain. Next, analyze. The pupil breaks learned information into its parts in order to understand and identify evidence for a conclusion. Yes, from the word itself, analyze, they can now give their interpretation. They can now analyze a certain text. If it is true, it is factual, or it is under by a falsification theory, something like that, and so on and so forth. Next one is evaluate. Evaluate or evaluation, the pupil makes decisions based on in-depth reflection, criticism, and assessment. So the learners, the pupils can now evaluate. Pwede na nilang ma-assess kung like for example, if meron silang ginawa or something, and they can now evaluate, they can now reflect. Also, they can now assess themselves if may natutunan nga ba sila doon sa topic, and na-understand nga ba nila kung ano yung tinuro sa kanila or hindi, or it depends. Yes, they can now evaluate. Last one, according to the Bloom's taxonomy of the cognitive domain, last one is create. So here, the pupil creates new ideas and information based on what has already been learned. Yes, itong create, dito yung mga decision making, they can now create their own preference, like what we have discussed a while ago. Dito na nagkakaroon ng tangible evidence. Dito na nila may papakita kung ano yung pinakanatutunan nila doon sa natalakay. Like for example, in elementary level, create, they can now create their own individual sentences to prove na meron nga ba silang natututunan. And they can now make a problem solving, and at the same time, they can solve it. Kumbaga, higher na yung cognitive domain ng learners. And those are the 6 categories that belong to the Bloom's taxonomy of the cognitive domain, starting from remembering, understanding, applying, analyze, evaluate, and create. So that's it, and thank you for listening.